that make some prepared statements. You know, it's sort of unusual to come together and conjure up somebody's memory at the same time that you're saying goodbye to them or wishing them well in wherever they go. I mostly believe ceremonies like this are for the people who are left, but in this case, you know, I believe that this is just what's needed to release Stephen from this plane. I know he wanted people to gather when he died. And I've learned that since he died, I learned that. And I appreciate that we're here to do this as a group. As we age, gathering together to remember our passing friends is becoming more commonplace for many of us, right? It's just sort of the way it is. And when someone we know well dies, a piece of our own story dies with them. Our lives and our community are made richer by our sharing our lives and stories together. And the price of that richness is the loss we feel when people die. So there's no escaping grief, especially when you open your heart to life. Everyone wants to live a long time, but when you speak to the folks who live the longest, they often reflect that the world they knew is gone and how alone or strange the world feels because all of the stories that people held about them are gone because they lived the longest. You know, and it's the way. And death at the end of a life well lived is about the best the universe has to offer any of us. I ask us all to look around now at each other and to realize that we all had a role and a part in Stephen's life, and he had a role in ours. Some of us know each other for years, others of us are brand new, but today we are sort of all united by our caring enough to come here to remember Steve and see him off. Let's take a minute, just everybody take a deep breath. We always have a lot of things in our head, and let's just take another, and just clear it and let it go. Because for this little bit, you don't have to think about all the things you might normally think about, and just let's be open vessels for whatever can transpire. Everything is always changing, but we always have this moment now. As we gather in love and friendship, take a moment to be grateful for this earth, mother of us all. All life clearly comes out of the earth, and all life is going back to it. And it's a beautiful system, and I'm so glad to be part of this dance and to be here with all of you now. We all have different connections with Steve, as he had a multifaceted life, both here and in Ithaca. As most of you know, he was entranced by the idea and vision of social entrepreneurship in Africa, and was hoping to spend more time there until kidney failure took him. Even when he was in Ithaca, he let me know he usually went to bed early so he could begin his workday at 3 a.m. because he was so excited to be emailing everybody in Africa when they came to work at 9 a.m. That was where he was. You know, even as he felt the ravages of his illness, his passion for investing in Africa's future was really strong. He loved how he was treated by African people he met and the active community he created in the time he was there. He took great pleasure at how the small acts of kindness he was able to do for local Cape Town residents had such lasting effects in their lives. A little bit went a long way, and he had lots of little bits to share, and he would share stories about a driver who he helped get a chauffeur's license, or all these different things that would change people's lives. And he certainly appreciated the cost of living and the good food there, and he could live like a king and feel really relaxed about it the whole time. So the end, right? So, you know, on his last trip to Africa, he came down with a flu or some other viral disease. And perhaps, most likely because of his kidney failure already, you know, it hit him really hard. And everywhere he went, every doctor said, oh, you're dying. But he wasn't really dying, he was just really sick. But he thought he was dying because that's what everybody told him, and he felt awful. So I don't know, some of you on Facebook might have had to remember those confusing texts where everybody's, well, did Steve die? Is he dying? Is he dead? And, you know, Liz was doing her best to keep us all in the loop, but nobody knew what was going on. And it got very confusing. And he really wanted to die. He told me he was going to die. He felt like, I'm done. I am so glad. And he wouldn't die. His apartment lease ran out. He's like trying to figure out what to do, and Liz brought him back home. He came back here. He went to the hospital. I think Jill, Cindy took him to the hospital. Every doctor there said, you're dying. You know, you're dying. He checked into hospice care, And, in hospice care, he just wanted to die. I remember I went to visit him because I knew he's in hospice care. I didn't know the first time I saw him. And I said, Steve, can you talk? I said, because he really wanted to be dead. He did not want to get, he did not want to re-engage in the world, and he didn't want to speak because he was just waiting to die. And everybody in hospice care is sitting there dying, and he's not. And he's there day after day after day. And you guys know Steve, like the idea of spending all the money to be in hospice care and not dying just seemed like this is a bad deal, right? And so it was good. So he checked out on hospice care. Also, when you go to hospice care, you have to give up all of your medical treatments to go to hospice care. And so this was really flipping him out because he was doing so much to stay alive every day for 2 years, right? Like, I'm not going to go into his personal routines. He's told them to me, and you don't want to know him in a way. But he did everything he could to stay alive. He stopped everything, ready to die. He didn't die, and in fact, he kind of got his color back a little bit. He's walking around hospice care every day doing his walk, and everybody else is in their rooms dying, and he just didn't fit. So he checked himself out, but he was really, really weak, looked really awful actually, and started getting some transfusions, and he got some strength back, and then the doctors always, for 2 years, have been saying, man, the answer for you is dialysis. That's the only thing that's going to keep you alive. And Steve had said, I'm not doing dialysis for 2 years. And I think he lost some friends who got sick of him being sick when he could have done dialysis. Everybody, it's hard to watch somebody suffer. And he wasn't going to do dialysis. And this last time he said, you know what, I'm going to try it because maybe it's okay. Maybe I can stay alive. And he did a session of dialysis and he felt really good. He did a couple sessions, felt really good. And they put a permanent port in him once he decided to do it. And he looked at that port and he hated it. He hated it. They told him, again, I don't know how well you know Steve, but one of his biggest things was going to the pool and exercising. That was one of his everyday things. And with this port in there, he couldn't exercise. And then he thought, you know what? I don't really want to live like this. And I think he went into himself pretty well. And he looked at his life and said, I've had a good life. I have lived to my 70s, I'm good. I'd rather go out now than extend it by ways I don't want to. And I know a lot of people have seen people carry on a lot longer than maybe their body wanted to, and it's a lot of suffering, and you get to watch a little more TV, but it's not maybe worth it, right? And that's what he came to. And and it's one thing to come to the idea, it's another thing to actually do it, and so I'll go back to my notes and see where I'm at, So I tell you, the doctor told him to die, and he went to do it. So he decided to stop dialysis, and he still thought, well, you know what? I've been around for 2 years not doing dialysis, and even though they're telling me this, we'll see what happens. I'm going to start my routines again. I'm going to start doing my medicine. I'm going to prepare to die. I'm going to contact all my friends and family and resolve issues. He's all, about it. And like a couple days after he stopped dialysis, he went with Larry and David down to Corning maybe to see a doctor to talk about preparing for end of life or things like that. And the doctor took a look at him and said, you're dying. Go to the hospital right now. And I guess Steve might have been getting a little loopy because he went to the hospital, they admitted him, and then we had people coming in to sit with him through the thing, and just by chance, I came that Friday night. He went to the hospital, he went down to Friday morning to Elmira, or Corning, came to the hospital Friday afternoon, and when I got there around 5, 6 o'clock to sit with him for a couple hours, he was still with it, right? He knew what was happening. I'm dying, and I'm okay. And it's not, I wish I wasn't dying, but I'm okay. This is what I'm choosing. He still had that facility for a little bit longer. By a couple hours later, Liz came that night, and I don't think he was even talking when you got there. Maybe, yeah. Even in a couple hours later, I mean, it goes pretty quick. I don't understand the mechanisms of the body. He was just sort of unconscious, right? And I gotta say, Liz was an angel there. She advocated for him and made sure they took care of him really well. I was thinking, well, they know what they're doing, and I'm watching them moan and groan and, unconsciously and be really uncomfortable. And she took it on herself to track down all the doctors to make sure he was medicated in a way that he was resting at ease, right? And which was really nice. And then the next day he passed, and you know, that sort of, you know, what it was. And, you know, he had no regrets. He went with grace and the strong belief that he was on the right path. It's interesting because I don't particularly think of him as a spiritual being, but in those last days, you know, he was, right? And now whatever it was, he seemed like, you know, I'm good with this, and whatever's coming next, I'm good with. And so, you know, he thought he had weeks and months, but he didn't. And, you know, I guess that's, so then the other thing is that we have a volunteer here who's going to be filming this because Steve had friends in Africa who wished they could come. He had pricey friends in Austin, Texas, and Costa Rica. He left Ithaca a lot. We can talk about that a little later. So later on, we're going to ask everybody who wants to say something to come up, and I ask that you come stand here or sit in this chair just so you can be recorded. So his sister Debbie, who's not here, really wanted to see what was said about him. And if you don't have anything to say, it's okay, but if you do, if you could come up here and say it. And so now I'm going to introduce Rukmini, who is right here, and Rukmini has been a great friend of Stephen's. Why this was so easy to organize was because Stephen told Liz, I want a memorial at the farmer's market. Like, okay, that made it easy. Rukmini said, I've been taking Steve shopping. You know, maybe you guys know this, but Steve gave up his car years ago, and then when he got sick, he really kind of worked with his friends to kind of make things work. And Rukmini took him shopping every week for a year. So she said, I know exactly what he would like to have served at his memorial party. So it was, you know, all fell into place. And so, you know, here we are. And I do have more things I want to say about my relationship with him, but I'm going to save that for when we come back after the dances, when I'm going to ask anybody else who would like to say something about their personal relationship with him to say something. One last thing, 4 people could not be here who really wanted to, and they wrote things down that they wanted said. And given that I've spoken so much, perhaps somebody here would like to volunteer to read some of these instead of me, right? I will if I have to. But if somebody wants to just come see me, we'll find one of these for you to read. And now, Rukmini, I'll step aside and let you come over here for the camera.
I've been a little preoccupied with the details of organizing this, all the food and stuff, so I'm not prepared like Gary was with actual things to say. So I just would like to say, you know, Stephen and I knew each other for more than 35 years, and he and I originally met at the dances of Universal Peace. So some people who maybe knew him more recently didn't realize that, yeah, he really did have this whole spiritual side. He used to hang out at Kripalu when it was still a yoga ashram. And he asked me if we could do this chant at his service. So we will do a chant, and I will try and encourage people, even if you don't think that you're a dancer or a singer. We will make a little circle, and we will do this chant. And I will say one of the really sweet things in the last several years is that Steve and I also got to share our love of Cape Town, South Africa. And I know when he first said, this is where, you know, I want to come, I want to spend my winters there. And I was like, great, you know, I've been spending my winters there for 15 years, and I love it there. And I was like, oh, perfect, I know the perfect neighborhood for you. And there's this small but very active Jewish community in Cape Town, and they all live in the same place. And Steve just took like one look there. He just like stepped in. It was like his whole neighborhood. He was just so loved. And like Gary said, in South Africa, it's very common. Like it's part of the culture that our elders really are like honored and respected. And it was wonderful to see Stephen get all of this like love and appreciation from these young entrepreneurs that he, you know, advised and guided. And you'll see one of them has written, you know, like a little eulogy, which somebody will read later. So anyway, yes, I knew him for a long time, loved him, and yes, the last couple of years of his life, every week we would come here at Farmers Market, we would walk as far as he was able, and we would go grocery shopping. So I really do know all of his favorite foods, and I really did order them all, and I will please beg everybody, please eat, or, you know, there's going to be a lot of leftovers that people will have to take home. So as far as the chant goes, the chant, if anybody here is like, knows Krishna Das's music, you will maybe have heard this mantra before, Hindu mantra. 7 syllables, really simple. My guru, Swami Shivananda, always said that these 7 syllables are just beloved by millions and millions of Hindus and yogis around the world. It's recited every day. And he said that chanting this mantra, reciting this mantra, has the ability to open up the gates or the doorways to perennial happiness and everlasting peace. Just these 7 little syllables. And so as I've been like thinking about this chant, I really like to just imagine like those gates or those doorways opening up, and Stephen just really gracefully just walking right through them, and all of us as well. Like the power of mantras can be that it activates things within us. It activates our own spiritual qualities. And the translation of this mantra, Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram, the translation is victory to the truth, victory to righteousness and justice. And yeah, so I just invite all of us to imagine those gates like opening up, perennial joy and happiness and eternal everlasting peace, and that's what lies before all of us, and that Stephen is already there. So our poor guitarist, I know I've got all these great guitarists here tonight, but nobody knew I needed a guitar because Todd Rose was supposed to be here with his guitar and set up the whole sound system, and he's not well. So this is a really poor second choice, but I did bring my harmonium, so at least we can like hear the notes. And I'm gonna just carry it kind of, let's see, put it, maybe on the.
It's really hard to talk about somebody you've known for 40 years or so, to try to say some things to encapsulate it, because every time I started to write something down, a different thing would come to mind. And so whatever I say, it's just the tip of the iceberg of a relationship that we had. You know, we made a lot of memories over the years, and I've come here today to say goodbye to Stephen, right? We met when we were both recruiters, very fortunate, but 38 years ago, a mutual friend, Gary Cantor, started a men's group, and he invited Steve and I to be both join it. And Steve and I and one other fellow, David, who's not here today, it seems, we managed to stay through the whole length of the men's group, but it still goes on today. So we've been meeting for 38 years. We meet irregularly now, but for the first 20 or so years, we met weekly, which seems crazy when I think back on it, but it was so satisfying to us all that it made us do it. And you know, we had great fun together, but even more, we delved into the substance of our lives and shared our thoughts, experiences, beliefs, stories. And I gained a lot from that group because we saw that we had very different personalities, but we also saw an incredibly deep commonality among us all in our experiences. And it was, what was really most valuable and grounding was how over the 20 years, 30 years, like everybody's situations were changing, but everybody's was repeating. So one year somebody's getting divorced, and the next year, and somebody else is getting married, and somebody's having kids, and somebody's kids are getting out of the house, and then everything reversed, and the next person is getting a divorce, and the next person's having kids, and you could just see life unfolding in this way that was very real. So when things were happening to you, you didn't quite take it so personally, but you saw yourself in the great flow of life, and it was such a valuable experience. And Stephen was a major contributor to our group. You know, this is where I can say Steve was irreverent. He could make fun and make jokes about everything, and so it's okay if anybody wants to make a joke here today, because that's who he was, right? And you know, and he was a sensitive, caring man, supportive of his friends. He was fun to be around. I remember when he clandestinely lived in his office. I was talking about that with somebody today on Ithaca Commons, high up there, and we used to go up there and have our men's groups and go sit out on the roof at night and have a party and look out over Ithaca, and we just thought, man, we were on top of the world. And you know, it felt like life had so much promise. And now it feels like we were so young, but we're probably 40, you know, but it felt like, you know, our lives were just beginning or something, you know. I remember when Steve first started going to Costa Rica and how he loved the life he created there, and how you knew he was serious about a woman when he invited his girlfriend Janet to go there with him. Like, I was so surprised because he was so protective of his spaces, so I know he really cared deeply about her, you know. He was very careful around his commitments to women. He loved women, and he was very careful about committing to anything, you know. And then after one Costa Rica, I mean, he had years of being Costa Rica Steve, right? It was just who he was. And then he flipped it and started becoming Austin. And he started going to Austin every winter. He got involved with South by Southwest, and he'd come back with stories about Austin and the life he'd have there and all the people he met. He was very good at conversation, as probably you know, and it was easy for him to meet people and have good conversations, right? And so that. And then he did, I see Cornell up there. I remember he had his professional stint as an entrepreneur at Cornell, and nobody really knew what he did, and I don't think he actually knew what he was doing up there either, but he loved giving out his card that had the Cornell thing on it, and he was a professional entrepreneur. You know, he did that for a number of years, but I think doing that is what led him to start investing in women-owned businesses, which led to his thing with African-owned businesses. And as his ethical life kind of faded, like I can remember in the 80s and 90s, man, he was all over the place. You know, I'd walk on the Commons with him and everybody knew him. He was a downtown Ithaca guy all his life. In fact, he gave up a house on Tioga Street because he wanted to be on the Commons. He moved to Seneca Street. He thrived, and as we all do as we get older, we start turning a little bit invisible. And I think as he started to get a little more invisible in Ithaca, it was like a surprise to him, like what happened to this town where I knew everybody? And it's just sort of the aging thing again. But he went to Africa, and all of a sudden, man, he became the star again in some way. Like Rukmini said, he would regale me with stories. Maybe many of you heard about the respect, the way people were calling him and asking for advice, about people inviting him to be on this board of directors or that board of directors because they appreciated his sage wisdom, that an older Jewish man in Africa who was interactive was a unique thing, and people were seeking him out, and he really loved that, right? You know, he took great pleasure at being a medical miracle, right? Like that was a big, you all probably saw his Facebook pages or wherever he wrote, LinkedIn, you know, doctors told him he was going to die. All the people, he joined groups of other people who had these diseases, and he'd say, they're all dying. Everybody, you know, I'm the only one left from these groups. So he every time he saw the doctor, they said, you shouldn't be alive, right? And he was, right? He had a strong constitution, you know, and he grew, like I said, he grew stronger in his mind and his spiritual nature, or at least his public display to me of his spiritual nature, you know, as his body was falling apart. I was so impressed that he met death with dignity. You know, he stood tall and confident even at death's door. I can conjure Steve up in my own being when I just, like, he had this way of like wanting to puff himself up a little bit to feel strong, and he just loved when he was in that mode. And as he made this decision to die, even though it was hard, I know he felt really good about himself, which is a strange, you know, a kind of a strange thing. It's paradox to feel really good about yourself as you're dying, but I'm a firm believer that one of the most important things is how we face and meet death, and that whatever's going to happen is going to be an extension of how we meet death. And so I'm really hopeful for whatever he's going into, or whatever he is now, or whatever it is, because he met death with dignity, standing tall, and feeling really good about decisions. You know, he knew he had a full life. He knew so many people that, like, just in planning this, I've gotten to know Liz a little bit, Rukmini a little bit, people who I kind of saw by or didn't even know. I realized that Steve had these very deep relationships with lots of people. He was able to have a lot of different friends, and not that he deliberately kept them separate, he just went in so many different directions. And, you know, it really came out for me after he died and seeing that. So he had a full life. I'm really glad to have been a part of it. I wish the best to all his friends and his family. And, you know, he had been a really good friend and confidant for me over the years, and I wish him well on whatever journey he is on. And Carla, it looks like she's chosen to come and say something. So, and then just come up on your own as you have something to say.
So this is from Sue Merkel.
about our 40-year history. We've traveled adventures to the Berkshires, Quebec City, and beyond. We've walked together through a pandemic, swam together at the island, and shared many great meals. We had good laughs and serious conversations. We supported each other as we both went through easy times and some pretty difficult times. There's a saying, don't blame others for the road you're on, it's your own asphalt. Life presented many challenges for you to navigate. Through it all, you have made your road. Some decisions were courageous and some seemed confusing, even questionable. Let there be no doubt they were your decisions. From you, I learned that my road was up to me. I learned to examine my situation and change what I was in my power to change. In the end, we all all we hope for is peace. Whatever that's like, I hope you are there now. Forever your friend, Sue Merkel. Sue Merkel. Other than the beauty that we shared as a group, I just remember him being part of our beautiful circle and all the beautiful things we shared, and don't really have any specific individual experiences or whatever, but I just loved him as a brother, and so yeah, I'm glad we're doing this.
African friend, Sahil Afriya.
Who are you?
I'm Sally Lockwood. I met Stephen in the early 90s when he lived in that bank building on the Commons. That's how I met him. And I don't even remember how I met him, just because he's so social. And I'm such an introvert that it was easy to talk with him. So from Sahil Afriya. I first met Stephen in 2022 when we were supposed to meet in Kenya for the same event, flying separately. A visa issue stopped him from boarding his flight, and what began as me trying to help over messages turned into a deep conversation that changed everything. That's kind of how I met him. Around that time, he discovered his kidney failure, and I remember telling him, "This is your new life." From that moment, we became real friends. We stayed close after that. I often went to him for advice, especially about life and relationships, and he always listened with patience, honesty, and a sense of humor. We shared peaceful beach walks and also some of the hardest days, including a very difficult time in Cape Town, when he was in really bad shape. Even then, his spirit stayed strong and hopeful. I'm truly grateful to God that I met someone as cheerful, optimistic, lively, and generous as Stephen. He was a good-hearted man, a true gentleman, and he made people feel seen and supported. Stephen, thank you for your friendship, your guidance, and your courage. We love you, we miss you, and we will carry your spirit with us. May you rest in peace.
The reason I wasn't going to talk, and in fact, Stephen and I discussed the fact that I would talk at the graveside, but he knows how nervous I am, so he wasn't supposed to come here. But anyway, I'm speaking on behalf of Edna Brown. I think you guys know her.
Yeah.
She's the one who saved his life, and this is why. I kept saying, go to the doctor, you don't look good. We're walking around. Like, oh, we had a good run. I felt like crap. You felt like crap. We never felt well, right? Just figured COVID and the weather. She's the one who said, get downstairs. I'm getting you, get yourself in this car, and we're going to the doctor. And they did blood work, and they called him back to the hospital because he was in stage, whatever, the worst for kidney failure. And if it weren't for her, and he would say this too, he wouldn't have made it the years that he had. He would not have been in Africa, he would not have been able to do all these amazing things. So I wanted to thank Edna for that.
Edna. Right. I first discovered Stephen when he started his Facebook page called The Walk. After Janet's passing, Steve knew intuitively that if he did not get outside and move his body and be with people, he would not survive this loss. So he posted on Facebook that every Tuesday at 5:45 people could meet him at the farmer's market, and they would walk to Stewart Park and back. If no one came, he walked it alone. Sometimes there was one person, sometimes 10. I liked this page on Facebook. Stephen sent me a friend request and I accepted. Then within just a few weeks I met him in Gary Fine's backyard. Stephen and I started getting together weekly, sometimes for walks, sometimes for a meal, sometimes for a music event. One year we shopped weekly at Wegmans as part of our walking routine, joking that we were the happiest couple there. Stephen was a good friend and support as I navigated my divorce and moved into solo parenting. Stephen loved to post on Facebook, as you all know, and I took many pictures in the early days that he used in his posts. I learned many lessons from Stephen that have stuck with me, and I have and will put into use. Stephen thrived on routine, and as a retired person, his routines anchored him each day. As I contemplate retirement in a year, I know that this model will be a great one for me. The other thing Stephen encouraged me to do as a solo traveler is to volunteer at events I wanted to go to alone, so I would have a built-in community when I got there. I went to my first Bluegrass Festival solo as a volunteer and had a great time. Stephen loved good food, walking, and music. He built one of the broadest communities I know of on Facebook and on LinkedIn. He was proud of the support he gave to African and women's startups. Stephen often reached out to support other people, like offering to walk and talk around the holidays with friends and strangers alike. He embodied a phrase we used to say, solo but not alone. We had our ups and downs, but I miss him and hope he is somewhere walking to his heart's content. May his memory be a blessing. And the rest. And Stephen, I was in this men's discussion group at Gary's house, and we'd smoke a couple of joints and do a shot and discuss. We would discuss for a while. And as part of that, I just got close to him that way. And when Sish and I were married here at this very farmer's market, the second wedding ever to happen here at the farmer's market, Stephen gave a toast, a wonderful toast to us and to the community that formed around this place in Ithaca and so on. And I remember him very fondly from that time in my life. And it waxed and waned over the years, and that was okay too. I finally got to be with him at the end to say goodbye. Thanks, everybody.
Well, I'm Mark Tucker. I was actually on the early walks with Stephen. You know, I casually knew him, and he was such a community welcoming presence that he said, "Why don't we do this walk from the farmer's market?" And I said, "Oh, sounds great." And so I joined him for that, and then I'd see him occasionally when he's back in town. There was a period where he went to Costa Rica, I think it was Costa Rica, and he was describing how great it was because he would just live on fruit, and he was the most svelte I've ever seen him, you know. He just lived on fruit, and it was really economically a great place to live, but mainly what I got from him was that he was such a community welcoming presence, you know, in whoever he met, whoever's life he touched, he was just a welcoming presence. Such a sweet soul. Thank you.
My name is Bill Dietz, and in the 90s I met Steve, and I was talking to him about wanting to buy a house, and I had no idea how I was going to do that. And he said, "Well, you should come see me at my office on the corner of 13 and I think it was Buffalo Street." And I didn't know that he knew how to do this, and I'm not even sure if he knew. But he put it together for me and made me feel very comfortable about buying a house. So I was always very grateful to him for that, and I thought that his ability to do that was a mystery to me. That was great. And then I knew him several over the years. Thank you.
She didn't know Stephen very well. I knew Stephen as a friend of a friend, and I would see him at holiday parties and the Super Bowl, and was always a character in the house, as it were. And I sat down with him one time at a celebration, and he asked me this question that was like clear that he'd been paying attention. Like, we hadn't had many close conversations, but even then he still like got to this heart of the right question in that moment, and it was really beautiful to receive. And I just appreciated the friend that he was to everybody. Like, I appreciated how he gathered people and was at the center of the gathering, at the side of the gathering, and it's just really lovely to see him be such a dear, dear friend.
And seeing Gary and Jim and David.
And
Larry. You guys were at the ABC Cafe so often.
Yes.
The four, like,
Yes.
yeah. And anyway, so I just love that image that you guys were there. Like, I don't know if it was a weekly thing you did. But then Steve and I became butt buddies, I would say. And we would get high, we would have sex, and we would eat Ben and Jerry's ice cream when he lived on Utica Street. It was so fun. It was a fun memory. So we'd always kind of giggle about that every time we saw each other. And I loved his walking that you just addressed that Emma said, because that was in my neighborhood with Jonathan. They would do these walks, and I just really loved that. So, and then when he moved into Breckenridge Place, I was doing street outreach at the time, and he would say like, oh my God, I love watching. I'm just watching all these people going into Loaves and Fishes, and so he had this beautiful view of what was happening in the world. So we talked about that a lot. So, but really just seeing, it's a beautiful memory from ABC.
ABC.
Yes.
Wow. Tammy just said, because I'm Elizabeth, and I don't actually remember exactly meeting him, but it was at the ABC Cafe. And I only know this was because just this past weekend, I was going through a box of memorabilia, and I had an envelope that had birthday cards, letters from family and friends. And I opened this, and it was from Stephen. It's dated July 5th, 1989, and he wrote on July the 4th, Dear Elizabeth, hi, this is Stephen. I met you last week in front of ABC Cafe with Sheila. You seemed nice, fun, and had a great way about you. I'd love to get together and have dinner, a drink, take a walk, or whatever. Please call or drop me a note. His phone number, his address, and then a P.S. In trying to figure out how to contact you, I discovered we have a mutual friend, Amari, among others. Bye. And I'm just so thrilled that I found this in time for this.
Did you call him?
Smooth.
He was so smooth.
He was, we became friends. Obviously, I went on some adjustments. Not as much fun. I did actually have another fun experience with Stephen, like maybe a dozen years ago. We were both selected to be on the same jury in the state, New York State, but here in Tompkins County. And we were on the same jury, and in the trial, I became the foreperson that was peer selected. And so we listened to all the evidences, pros and cons, and then we went and sequestered. And there were 12 of us, and we were talking about all the pros and cons and what should we do and what should we do. And it was evident to me that Stephen and I were on the exact opposite sides of the picture. And I was like, oh my God. And there were like a couple people with him, a few people with me, and but it was getting a little polarized. So it was about money and rewarding somebody who had been injured. And we had already decided we were going to do that. So I quickly came up with this idea. I am not a mathematician. I never did well. But I asked everybody to let me know how much money this person should get. They gave me all their slips, and I added it up and divided it by 12, and that was what we gave.
Good job.
I'm Yarrow, and I'll never forget first time I met Steve was when he showed up at the dances, and it was with, I think it was with David and Larry and Jim, and I'm pretty sure he told me that he came there to meet women. So when we did the dance, yes, and Rick Reedy and I called the whole group the Swashbucklers. And so it's such a beautiful memory of him because it added so much. And then, even though he said that's the reason he came, there was this open-heartedness that he had that didn't come out immediately, right? It was like it took a little while, and then I felt the open-heartedness of him. So I've always appreciated that his whole energy that way. And the other thing I love about him is Steve's tofu dressing. You know, from the Kazakhstan days, he's the one that came up with that recipe. That's my favorite salad.
I gotta get into that, sorry. Now that we're on all the relationships, I have to clarify this. Steve and I were like cousins. We had no relationship. We wouldn't be friends had that ever occurred. When we met, it was like familial. He grew up on a street that my great aunt went to. I mean, ages apart, but we just loved each other. We were best friends, and that is one of the most special relationships I've ever had and ever will have. As anyone who knows me, this has been a devastating time. But like Gary said, he took life into his own hands. And he said, it's my time to die. And I looked at him, tears. I'm like, well, what are we going to do about this? And he's like, you got to stay connected spiritually. I said, okay, you're religious now. And he's like, all right, sure, great. I said, well, let's do that. And it felt better. I don't know why. Just having that conversation. So anyway, now that we're talking about relationships, I want to clarify.
Because Stevie, who I didn't know was actually called Steven today, was a fixture in our lives for a very long time. He was this mythical being that went out to go save the world, and he was also the hero in our pandemic life because he got me and my mom separated for 2 hours once a day. But Stevie was someone that my mom had they were best friends, and they had the type of relationship where conflict was worth fighting through. And one of the biggest conflicts that they sort of had was that Stevie was going to first move to Austin for half the year, and then he was going to move to South Africa for half the year. And I'd like to take this time to say that Stevie always had your back, because he didn't do either of those things. and he made you grow in a way, because even in death, he brought my mom to South Africa. Yes, it was to pick him up because he couldn't leave the state or the country. But he pushed her to be someone who is capable more fully of love in a non-familial way than she knew was possible. And I never had to think about what happened after life until Stevie. And I don't have the answers. But what I do know is what he did here. And there are millions of people who are impacted by that. And I know, for me personally, when I go to convince my mom that I should be allowed to go into war-torn Sudan for humanitarian effort, I will be saying it was what Stevie would have wanted.
Well, since we're on the topic of family and friends and introductions, I think I might have been one of the very first people that Stephen met. Jill, can you verify that?
I think that is true.
It must have been in the 80s maybe, yeah? When you and Stephen were hitchhiking across the country, and maybe after your trip or before your trip or in the middle of your trip, you happened to stop in Ithaca and you were walking in Stewart Park. And Bill and I were walking in Stewart Park, and we met you and Steve. And that was, I'll never forget that connection, and I don't think he ever forgot that connection. And that kind of, over the years, I have a little sadness in my heart that I didn't participate in those walks. I know I would have loved that. That would have been right up my alley. But you know, circumstances being what they were, I just didn't do it, didn't have the time, but missed that. And Stephen was a part of Ithaca, he was a part of the Ithaca community. He was somebody that for all those years through the 90s and the early 2000s that I just took for granted, because he was always, once he moved here, he was here. And he was here just as much as Farmers Market is here, and just as much as the Commons is here, and just as much as music at the Bernie Milton Pavilion. He was just a part of the fabric of Ithaca. I had a very special meeting with him, I guess within the last 2 years. We went to, it was winter, it was February, and I guess there was only one place open, and that was the Yellow Daisy, and he wasn't crazy about it. He didn't love the politics of the people that ran the Yellow Daisy. That being said, it was a place that was open, and it was really freezing cold. So we had a wonderful talk, a wonderful connection, the warmth, the depth. All it's been echoed and repeated, and I echo it and repeat it. I miss him. He's somebody that's been in the kind of the community and the fabric of life for a long time, and they're not there, and look back and say, golly, you know, I miss him. I miss the opportunities to have spent more time together. Yet there was always, I think, a real mutual friendship there, a really loving friendship. So, thank you, Steve.
Nobody has said they would do that, and they took the time to write it. The thing about Ron and Robin is they were college friends of Steve. So most of us met him in the 80s, right? So they would have met him in the 70s. And you can see the pictures down here, I think, were his college pictures. It's a real different look, a much younger thing. So it's fun to see that this is what they wanted us to know. And I think it's written from Ron's perspective, but I'm not sure. Stephen and I met at the very beginning of our freshman year at SUNY Albany in 1972. Right from the start, he possessed a truly magnetic personality. He was a sharp, creative guy with a quick sense of humor, an effortless coolness, and a spirit that was fun to be around. In those early days, we would share stories of our travels through Europe. While I was a mere tourist hiking around, Stephen was living it, working as a bartender in Newcastle, always doing his thing. Throughout his life, Stephen amazed everyone with the sheer breadth of his endeavors. He seemed to master entirely different worlds with ease. His time at Cabbagetown Cafe in Ithaca taught him the restaurant trade, which eventually led to the opening of Steve and Amy's in Gloucester, Massachusetts. He navigated the world of diamonds on 47th Street, I forgot about that, in New York City, and then returned to his passion for cooking when he became a food critic back in Ithaca. Oh, that's right, he did that too. His intelligence and sense of adventure were widely respected. Cornell hired him to unlock the unrealized potential within the patents generated by their faculty, a venture he later successfully pursued on his own. When he began spending winters in Costa Rica, he fell in love with Janet, unexpectedly, while ushering in an Ithaca theater during one of his trips home. Oh, while ushering at the State Theater, yes. They then immersed themselves in the world of coffee and bought a half dozen coffee farms and properties. Later, missing the States, he traded Central America for Austin, Texas, and volunteered at South by Southwest. His sharp mind and well-considered advice soon brought him an invitation to join one of their boards. Stephen's heart was as big as his creativity. He became a passionate investor in women-owned businesses and various other enterprises during COVID. He selflessly spent countless hours online mentoring young entrepreneurs in their 20s and 30s across Africa, helping them bring their dreams to life. This mentorship eventually took him across the Atlantic to speak at a business development conference. The success he had led to many interviews and articles about him, and eventually led him to choose to spend his winters in South Africa, where he built a cherished groups of friends and colleagues. Tragically, his health eventually began to fail. For 3 years, doctors warned Stephen he might not survive without dialysis, but Stephen, true to form, refused to be bound to a machine. He conducted deep research, fighting fiercely to maintain a high quality of life on his own terms. Against all odds, he succeeded in beating the medical predictions, living fully until his final few months. During those difficult days, the community he built in Cape Town and Ithaca enveloped him in love, provided nursing care, food, and a beautiful place to rest between the mountains and the sea. When Stephen passed, a pall fell across many corners of the world he had touched. His absence is a significant loss to the many lives he touched here in Ithaca, Brooklyn, Africa, Costa Rica, Texas, and throughout the LinkedIn and Facebook world. He was an extraordinary soul who lived a life of boundless adventure, connection, generosity, and curiosity. And the void he leaves behind is immeasurable. My deep and most heartfelt condolences to all of those that were touched by his life, and that's Ron and Robin, college friends.
Hi everyone, I am Jill, his first little sister. We since got a new little sister after that. I have this with me because I wrote some notes, but I'm hoping I don't need them. So I Googled this morning, I Googled like, what do you say at a memorial? Like what's a good thing to say at a memorial? And Google gave me some pretty good advice. Said share some positive personal stories and share some of his own personal innate traits, like what is it that makes Stephen Stephen. So I'll share a few a few remembrances, which is my first memory of Stephen. So he's 4 years older than I am. I remember being really little, like I was still in my crib at this time, and he climbed in, and we had this game where he threw the blanket over me, and I would fall down and laugh, and I'd get up and I'd throw the blanket over him, and he'd fall down and laugh. And we just did that again and again. And it was a very sweet memory of like just being and loving and having joy. Didn't have to, like, there was nothing else needed but being with each other. Another really sweet memory, and I forgot it until Rain, you shared what you shared, which is when he first got to town, we were living on Lynn Street, I think, and the farmer's market then was over on Taganic. It was much smaller than this and no permanent structures. And we would bake oatmeal cookies and carob fudge. And we made carob fudge, which wasn't baked. And we would cut it up and put it in like milk cartons and hitch a ride from Lynn Street over to the farmer's market and set up our crates as a stand, often like maybe sharing a part of a stand that somebody else had, and we'd sell them, but mostly it was about him, and that was when he was first in town. I had been here through college, so I knew people here, but he didn't yet. So we did that. He was at the market. He got to meet people, and we would trade. At the end of the day, we would trade whatever we had left over for real food, like vegetables and things, and food that we could eat. And that was just a very, very sweet, creative, fun time. And the most recent really fun time I remember is he was going to this blockchain club up at Cornell when blockchain was sort of new. And I'm a data person, so he was talking to me about blockchain. It's like, I want to go there with you. I want to learn what this thing is. And I was so fascinated by it. I still am. I'm not particularly into cryptocurrencies, but blockchain itself is fascinating to me. So anyway, we did that. We would talk about it. We took the white pages for Ethereum and Bitcoin and printed them out. He was supposed to read one and I was the other, and then we were going to trade. We never did the homework, but we kept going to the club, and eventually that turned into becoming venture capitalists together. So he knew Elisa Miller, who started Chloe Capital, women-run businesses, and so she was starting a venture capital firm that invested in women-owned businesses, and he really wanted to go in on it, and he wanted to do it with me. So we shared a share of that together. And it was really cool. We had gone down to Binghamton to see one of the pitch days. It was like five people were pitching, and Chloe Capital was going to choose one of those five as as part of the portfolio that we were being part of. And it's so sweet for me to see like how he grew that venture capitalism to South Africa. I was also with him when he was talking about starting a walking club. I was taking an improv class that I saw through the Free School. I don't know, y'all remember the Free School, where anybody who wants to teach something can just post it, and there were all sorts of different things. And he said, I want to be part of it, but I don't know what to do. All I do is walk. I said, well, then do that. So I feel like I was sort of at the beginning of that also, of like encouraging him, and he, and he just ran with it. And so it's very sweet to have him as my brother. We also had some hard times, and I'm not going to share that part because that's not part of the memorial of what Google said to share in the memorial. But,
They don't know.
but I will say that in terms of his personal traits, I know something that I really valued in him was he always wanted people to feel good. Like whether it was somebody who waited tables or somebody that was a business partner, like he really wanted to have that connection with them and have them walk away feeling good about themselves and about him and about whatever that energy was. And I appreciate that about him. And I think that's all I have to share now. I would love to talk and meet y'all, people that I don't know very well, people that I do know well, and as we circulate.
So I'm Cindy. I'm Stephen's older sister, and I'm the only person here who's known him his whole life. I was 2 when he was born, so I don't remember his birth. I remember Jill's birth, but I do remember that we were the only two kids in the house against him and I against our parents before Jill came along, and then we outnumbered them. And we did. All 3 of us worked together when we were young to make sure that we, Stephen and I were mischief makers, and Jill joined the team, and we were grateful for her. He was a very sensitive kid. He was not, as a child, he was not the guy you know now. He was not a big personality. He was very, very sensitive, very, almost introverted. And I saw him come out of that when he was a teenager. He grew up, we both grew up in a time, many of us are the same age. I grew up at a time when, the world was flipping over, changing from a very rigid place to a very, countercultural place, different culture. And he resonated to that. That spoke to him a lot. And so from the time he was in high school, he loved rock and roll and drugs. And I had to go around, like my parents would come up to me and say, is he smoking pot? Do you smell pot in the house? And I say, no, it's incense, don't worry. Well, I didn't smoke pot in the house. I definitely protected him from getting in trouble. And we lived in New York City in the days when you could get on a subway. It may take 2 hours from where we lived all the way out in the edge of Brooklyn. But you could go to Fillmore East and you could afford it as a 15-year-old, 16-year-old kid and go see, The Who or, The Grateful Dead or someone amazing. And he did that in spades. And he, grew his hair long and sort of began to come into himself. And that summer before he went to college, went to Europe and bartended at Newcastle and sort of began to become the adventurer that he was. And he went to a lot of places, told us about, all the places he went that I probably will never see, but he went to them all before they were discovered. He went to Belize before Belize. It's the first time I ever heard about Belize as a country was from him and his experiences there. He went to Eugene, Oregon, before it was known as a cool place. I mean, he just found these cool places and explored them and shared them. And he loved Ithaca. I mean, he came up here to see Jill, and this was his place. I think as a family member, I think there's a little more bittersweet feeling at this moment than many of you, because he he chose to be very warm and warm to people external to the family, but he had a very hard time with his family. But I do wanted to say that like he was really loved, by everybody. He didn't always love us, but I think he loved, but we always loved him. And he hadn't, he actually was the one I maybe saved my life because he convinced me to come up to Ithaca when the pandemic hit. I was medically had some fragilities, and a lot of people in Brooklyn were catching COVID. I was living in Brooklyn, in a very congested part of Brooklyn, and I came up to Ithaca, just because he sort of, Stephen does have a little bit of that, magic in him to say, it's a great place, just come. And so I did all the work to get here, but when I got here, it was like magical that the place was open, that there was a life here, that I could like live and breathe. In Brooklyn, I couldn't do that. And for about 3 weeks, Stephen was in my life in a way that he'd never been, because we'd never lived as adults in the same place. And then he stopped talking to me. And he didn't talk to me again until he was in South Africa, when he sent a text saying, I want to apologize for everything. I'm about to die, and I don't want to die without saying I love you. And I said, and I said it back. I love you too, Stephen. I hope you don't die, but if you do, just know I love you. And we were lucky, very lucky, and he was very lucky that we were able to, lovely people in South Africa who helped to get him here. Liz set up a lot of things that, when she was there to make that happen, and he was able to come back to New York, and he rallied. So, and Hospicare just, it saved his life. I mean, I'm volunteering now for the state for them because I'm so grateful. They saved his life, and he had all these months after that to enjoy life, and we did, reconnect toward the end, and it was really lovely. And I guess my last memories of him, they were very, very close to the end of his life, where he had the dialysis, and he got detoxified, and before the dialysis he wasn't able to eat anymore. He was dying, and then he had the dialysis and he was detoxified, and he started to get hungry again. So I said, well, can I take you out for a meal? And so we went out to several really good restaurants around town, and he ate me under the table, which was shocking. And he enjoyed every bite, and he talked to everybody in the restaurant and was happy. And the day he died, we had an appointment to go eat duck at Maya, which he'd never done. Jill and I, it's our favorite place. And I had been looking forward to it, and it was such a shock to know that, to go to the hospital Friday afternoon and know that we weren't going to go to Maya and have the dinner anymore. We had lost a lot of time over the years, and I was grateful for the time I had, but I would have liked more. So I'm a little bit envious of all of you to have all those great memories, but I have some, and I hope he is happy wherever he is, and and I'm glad that I had him in my family to just for the times we were able to connect. So thank you all for coming.
Folks said a lot of things that reminded me of Stephen's stories. My name is Sylvia, my mom was Janet. When I was 15, she came home late one day. She'd been at the State Theater, she met someone, they walked the whole way home. It was like an hour and a half walk. The next day this guy calls and he's like, this is Stephen with a V. And in my mind I'm like, how else do you spell Stephen? Why is he telling me this? And I'm like, Mom, Stephen with a V is calling. And she instantly is like, oh my gosh. Okay, she gets really excited. Like, she's been single parenting myself and my two siblings for maybe 2 years now in Ithaca. And like, I was horrible. My siblings were getting up at 5 a.m. for crew every day. So she just had no life until she met Stephen. So she was thrilled that he called. She was thrilled to spend time with them. And that was maybe the happiest that she was again, because she got to have this whole life that she didn't think she was going to have as a single mom. But to give you a little context in these places they lived, because I think so many things that Stephen brought as an influence, like, made my life better. And I didn't see that at the time when I was 16. But I'm looking back now, like, one thing that happened is he introduced me to Gary. and Gary's daughter Joanna. And when I was like, hey, we're 17, let's hitchhike across the country, and my mom was like, absolutely not. Gary and Stephen connected and found a way to make that happen, and put Joanna and I up, so it seemed like it was something that was going to be safe to do. And that was totally thanks to Stephen. But when they began going to Costa Rica every winter, for some of it, it was awesome because I got to be home alone, and that was great. I got like 2 months to myself. But they made me come down with them at one point, which I protested so much, which seems ridiculous, but to spend 2 weeks with my mom and Stephen in Costa Rica did not sound like fun. They also wanted to haul 10 laptops down with them because they were donating laptops to a school to get this whole school in this rural community online. So I also had to be a part of hauling all these laptops to Costa Rica. But we show up in San Ramon, which is the place that Stephen lived for a long time. But at this point, they bought these coffee fincas in La Paz, which should be maybe like, I don't know, 45 minutes from San Ramon, but you get in the Jeep, instantly you're on dirt roads, you get a flat, you're waiting for someone to come help you, and then people were coming to like the side of the road to support you and hauling you back into San Ramon, and like 6 hours later we make it to this coffee finca, and La Paz is not a town. La Paz is 4 houses, no electricity. Did it have running water? I can't remember. We did only eat fruit, which was nice. A very limited diet, but that was lovely. But I couldn't believe that he had pulled my mom out of this, what I think would have been a very boring, many years of just raising kids. And she had this amazing life with him in Costa Rica and then in Austin, Texas. I mean, that was the same thing. Like, they would send me photos every day showing me the cool places they'd gone in Austin. And for some reason, Whole Foods was one of their favorite places in Austin. So maybe life did get a little bit more boring as they aged. But because of Stephen, both my siblings moved to Austin and became full-time musicians. I think because of Stephen, I'm just realizing this, we've been watching Law and Order every night for about 6 months. And he used to come to my house because he didn't have TV at his house. And I think he also didn't have a shower at his house for a long time. So he would spend a lot of his time like in the top room with my mom, just watching Law and Order, showering, I assume, and doing all the things that he couldn't do at home. And as a 16-year-old, I was like, what is this guy's lifestyle? Like, he takes the license plates off his car every time he leaves town and not pay insurance on it and save money. He's like renting out half of his house to people and like giving up what seemed like necessities just to kind of live in this more frugal way. But I think he set a really beautiful example of living how he wanted and having the full life that he wanted in Costa Rica and in Austin and in Ithaca. And I think a lot of the value he found was in people, not money, not having his RAV4 with the license plates that would come and go as he pleased. So just a couple of those little stories of like Stephen's time in the 2000s. I will say, like, Stephen and I didn't always get along also. I was a really rough 16-year-old, and it's taken me many, many years to, like, reconnect with him. But I did have a lovely couple of, like, sessions with him, and one of them was sitting at Diamonds while he was not really able to eat, but he still thought that was the best place to go and hang out and just look at the food and smell it and enjoy it. And I'm grateful we had some time to catch up and, like, be adults. Thank you.
So, hi everybody. I met Stephen in 19...
Just announce yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is David Skowronek. I met Stephen around 1980. I was living in a commune, actually with Jeff Furman and some other people, in about 60 miles east of here. And I came to Ithaca. I was making tofu at home, so I came to Ithaca to start a tofu business. And I got a partner, and we started. And then actually after about a year, I was freaking out for a bunch of personal reasons. And so I got out of the tofu shop, just went back to my place in New York City, my parents, and recovered. And then I came back to Ithaca looking for something to do. So I went to Cabbagetown because I was growing a lot of vegetables. And anyway, so I met Steve, and Steve actually hired me to be a cook at Cabbagetown. And it was a really good transition for me to get out of my funk that I was in. And we connected right away. you know when you meet somebody and you feel like you already know them? I don't know, it happens a few times in life. And it felt like that with him. It's like it was an instant recognition. And so we were hanging out, I was cooking, he was waiting tables up there. And then the guy who was my partner wanted to get out of the tofu shop. So I got very excited and decided to go back into it. And Steve was just a very good businessman. You know, you could pick it up right away. He was unbelievable about making money. He could make money no matter what he did. Even when he didn't intend to. Like he went to Costa Rica to kind of get away, and then by the time he left, he was selling houses and building, you know. And so he was a huge help to me in the tofu business as a business consultant and personal support person. And we became very close. We talked on the phone every day. It was like a brother. And then eventually we actually bought a house together on Lewis Street. That was going to be, because our love lives kept changing, so we decided we wanted to have a house when we were both old and, you know, and girlfriends were gone and we could just live together in this house. Kind of drop dead there. So, anyway, I owned the tofu shop for about 15 years and then finally got sick of it. And I sold the business and I moved to Europe to live in a Buddhist center in the south of France. And then we kind of slowly drifted apart over that time. And then I met a woman who I fell in love with at the retreat center and came back to Ithaca, and I had a place in the country, but we still had this place on Lewis Street, and then we had a daughter, and we wanted to go to Ithaca schools and whatever, and so we moved into the house on Lewis Street part-time. And then I eventually bought him out of the house because we wanted a place in town and in the country. And so we really kind of drifted apart. Then I would see him for dinner every once in a while, but then about 4 months before he actually died, maybe 6 months, we reconnected again and started having meals together and hanging out together, and it was really wonderful. And he was talking about Africa then, and he was so enthusiastic about it. It was really, I think, the happiest I saw him in his whole life, really, of when things were going good for him in Africa. And he's just a remarkable man. And the way he handled his illness was absolutely astounding. He sort of became a nephrologist. He knew every single thing about kidneys and what he could eat, and he had a diet, and it was amazing. And then when these doctors would talk to him, he knew all the chemical names of everything and talked about how much this should be or what doses should be. And it's just, I was just astounded. And he was able to maintain himself for years on his own brains, on his own volition, really. And so that was remarkable. And then as he went down, I started hanging out with him more, and I got to be with him right through the worst time of his dying period. And it was just amazing to watch him face his death in such a courageous way. And that he really did it on his own terms. There aren't that many people who would take out the port he had for dialysis and then take his chances with knowing that he wanted to live a better life than the kind of life that you have if you're on dialysis. I had taken care of another friend of mine, Jeremy Werben, who had childhood diabetes, and he had to do dialysis in the end. And it's just a terrible way to you go there for 6 or 8 hours a day and several times a week. And he was just courageous enough to know what he was willing to accept in life and what what he didn't want to. The quality of his life wasn't going to be there anymore. And so he decided that he'd rather pass than live that way. So that was a real inspiration for me. And I think of him all the time and wish him well. And he probably is figuring out some way to make money where up in heaven or whatever. I knew how to make tofu, but he knew how to make money. So it was really useful to have him in with me. So I appreciate everything he did, and whatever crap we had, it was very easy to let go of. And I will miss him, as will all of you, I'm sure.
Amen. My name is Joni, and I had different passing relationships with Steve. And I first met him through my Steve. I was married to a Steve, my first marriage. My favorite ex is named Steve. And Steve owned a honey house. I mean, we did. We had a honey business out on Route 13, and Steve and Steve liked to kind of talk about business together, and then he would remember that I was hanging around. And we really didn't know each other well. I was getting more into academia, and then very much from what you were saying, you would just suddenly be hailed down on the Commons or someplace, and you get into a conversation with Stephen as if you had just talked to him yesterday. And it would be so natural that you forget, that this is not a person who I know on an everyday basis, but we would then end up sitting and shooting the bull for an hour on a bench on just all kinds of subjects. It would be music. We all like music. I'm wearing my Grassroots shirt because he just loved Grassroots, and he was always talking about South by Southwest. Anyway, I just had such always good vibes. I never had a bad vibe relationship with him. And then I guess it was about a year ago, because I was reading his missives on Facebook, which a lot of us may have seen. And he was talking about the fact that he was dying, and that it was a miracle that he was alive. And he was saying, well, I'd really like to have people come and bring a meal over or something, and we can talk. So one night, I wrote to him and said, bring me a meal over, just kind of off the cuff. And of course, we started talking. And I'm Jewish. I'm not a religious person, but I'm very happy being Jewish, and like a lot of the things about it. And I had gone through, at that point, my mother had just passed away, and my husband had developed Alzheimer's, and he passed away. So I had just gone through two major passing in my life of people who I then, and in both cases it was during COVID. So it became very personal for those people who were sharing with me. And Stephen wanted to know. He really wanted to know what my experience was. And he also wanted to talk about, particularly about my mother. There are a few people here who may have met my mother. She passed away at 102. And this was just 3 years ago. And she made a decision. She was actually in amazing shape for 102. She never used a walker. She had a kidney removed when she was 39 years old, which actually kind of is a conversation that Stephen had. She had kidney cancer in 1959 when, just by an amazing stroke of luck, the cancer had hit the renal artery. So she was bleeding and they found it very early because it's incredibly lethal. And so she had dealt with living on one kidney for over 60 years, and it could be done. And so he was talking about just the miracles of kidneys in general. And he wanted to know about her decision because she came down with a very bad UTI, which is not a good thing on one kidney, and not a good thing if you don't have functioning kidneys like Stephen. And she had to be treated with a very heavy antibiotic. They used Cipro. It was a decision, should we just let her pass and become septic, or do we treat it and deal with the disease that was taking over? And it left her like a wet rag. And she felt if she could not get up and walk and eat and have a normal life, call hospice care. She said, "How old am I?" I said, 102, Mom. "And how many months?" 7. She said, I'm ready. I'm gonna let it go. Don't think twice about it. Call hospice care. And I told this to Stephen. He was actually kind of was fascinated by the story. And he actually said, regardless, this was last year, he said, "I'm really going to keep this in mind. I want to keep in mind that when I'm ready, I want to make that decision." And I kidded him. I said, as a Jewish kid, Stephen, you're like the whole story of Hanukkah. You know, there's a menorah that went for 8 days. You're going for years on no kidneys. I mean, it really is a fascinating miracle. And I just am sorry that I think, like a lot of us, that no matter what your relationship with Steve, you kind of want to just hear his voice again. It was always so much fun to talk to him. Or I suppose if you had, different conversations that were even negative, you just could hear that in your head as well. But I didn't have the negative conversations. So I've been asked here, this was not planned, if we could end this, because this is the way we would end a memorial service, in a Jewish memorial service. We would end with Kaddish. So I was asked if I would come up and read Kaddish. And let me tell you, I have to read it, so it's on my register here. I don't have it memorized, but I can read it. And I just wanted to tell people who aren't familiar with it what it actually is. And it says here that Kaddish, it was originally in the 13th century, it was an Aramaic prayer, and it was said during every traditional prayer service. It's a sanctification of the Creator. And it's in Hebrew, the word is kadosh, which just means holy. And a person who's mourning basically doesn't talk about the person who passed. You kind of look around yourself and you think about what's holy. And it transcends, I think it transcends all spiritual paths, because you're really, you're kind of, again, like we were doing with Remini, we're really thinking about the passing of a person and who's left, and that the presence around us now is just giving praise to being here and who brought us here. So I'm going to recite the Kaddish. And this is, thank you. Anybody who wants to, we usually stand. The person who's mourning stands for Kaddish, as Jill just automatically did. Just you stand for Kaddish.
and particularly with Cirilla. V'yikadal v'yikadash shemei Rabbah v'yalma divrah mahute v'yamlik mahute v'yakon u'mekon u'hayeh d'chol beit Yisrael v'yagalah u'mizmar kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarah v'yalam yonai v'yomaya Yitbarak v'yitabah v'yitabah v'yithamam v'yitaseh v'yithadar v'yithalel v'yithalal shmei kedusha v'yihu le'ala min kol bracha v'yashata tushbachata v'ne'amata da amiran v'ama v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shlamaya v'hayim aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'akol Yisrael v'imru amen. The last part is, may there be abundant peace from heaven, with life's goodness for us and for all the people. And let us say amen. May the one who brings peace to the universe bring peace to all of us, all the people of Israel and everywhere else. That's my parentheses. And let us say amen. Amen.
Happiness, everlasting peace, and I'm going to say, since there's so many dances of universal peace people here, please chant it loudly with me. We'll sing it a couple of times, and then we'll make a circle, and we'll just dance it, which will be really simple and sweet. Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram. Beautiful. Let's try it again. Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram, Shri Ram Jai Ram Jai Jai Ram. Beautiful. Everybody's a natural here. So let's come and just form a circle. Hold hands.
Climb up there.
Really don't want to dance. It's fine if you sit, but you gotta sing. And all we're gonna do, yes, got it. We might even make, I think we'll make 2 circles, don't you think, Sherry? So let some of us come inside, and you guys hold back. Yarrow's back there, so he can carry the tune. Let's make maybe at least 12 or 14 people inside. And truly, all we're gonna do, a few more in the middle maybe. Perfect. All we're gonna do, really simple. We're just gonna be circling around, walking, and just swinging our hands gently. So there's a very playful quality to this chant. This is all we're gonna do. So let's all feel our feet firmly on the ground. Nice deep breath in through those roots that are growing out the soles of your feet, all the way up to the crown of your head. And when you exhale, send the breath all the way back down through your roots. And we'll begin. Shri Ram
Amen.